Hello everyone, I'm here today to look at a recent game of mine. I'm going to analyze my mistakes and share some of my thoughts about this game and 0K in general. I hope that some of you find this useful. This is a game I've played recently against Putis on Vantage. I have the shield bots on the left and he's starting with the cloak bot factory on the right. I'm using the Guardian commander and he's going with the engineer commander. Before I start off this replay, I'd like to talk about how I like to play this map and some of these matchups in general. I quite like the Guardian Commander as he's quite versatile and has a good upgrades. I've been recently upgrading my commander quite a lot, but in a way that is slightly unusual. I don't think I can show. No, I don't think I can show the entire upgrade path that I have for him, but basically the idea is to not spend a whole lot on his modules and instead just get the weapons and get to level 5 quickly, because at level 5 the Guardian Commander gains the ability to create a slow drone, which also has quite good DPS. So usually my objective in a lot of these matchups with Guardian Commanders to eventually morph to level 5. The Engineer Commander is also a perfectly serviceable choice. It's quite nice to have a slightly accelerated start due to its build power. Has a 12 build power as opposed to 10 of the normal commanders, and I think the jump commander has 8. The increase in build power just has all kinds of advantages, whether it's getting your base started or later on in the game when you find yourself having to build a lot of defenses around your commander. Personally, I just like the Guardian Commander. Even the starter drone is surprisingly useful in some situations. Where the enemy comes in with a single scout and drone basically means that you don't have to worry too much about it, it'll just shoo it away. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the matchup. This is a matchup you'll see quite often, shield bots versus cloak bots. They're both very popular choices on somewhat hilly maps. This map is kind of like a hybrid map. It's not supremely hilly, but as you can see on the F1 map, there's slopes everywhere, so vehicles, when they traverse this terrain, they will slow down a lot, and vehicles will also not be able to scale these cliffs. So if you do go with vehicles on this map, you may find yourself outmaneuvered against non-vehicles. It's not quite hilly enough to be a mandatory spider map. I'm not really sure any of the maps currently in the matchmaking pool are spider only. It's kind of a completely different discussion. But anyway, you'll see this kind of matchup quite often. Obviously, at this point, I don't know what my opponent's lab is. So what I like to do with the shield bot factory is just immediately make one dirt bag and send it out to go and scout. I guess I can go ahead and start the game right now. Generally, I'm quite comfortable with this particular matchup as the shield bots, because I like the raider matchup where the bandits perform really well against their glaives, and likewise the rogue later on performs really well against the ronins. On this map, there's also a few choices to be made in terms of expansion. I used to expand with my command. I would always get the starting maxes with my commander. I used to walk to the quad max over here, which is kind of safe and close to the base. The idea is to just simply get in there as quickly as possible with your commander to jumpstart your economy. But lately I've kind of been favoring a different approach, which is to expand the other way. The commander will first go here and claim these double maxes and then move up to try and contest the border area. As you can see on this map, there's quite a lot of metal on the corners of the map, both in terms of metal spots and there's even some reclaim nearby. So it's quite nice to get into these side areas relatively early. Another reason I like doing this is that it's generally a good idea to go for the more dangerous path with your commander, as he's quite powerful and relatively safe early on in the game, especially a Guardian commander. It's not easy to take down, so you can leave the slightly safer spots to be claimed by your constructors. Another reason is that these mexes on the corner of the map that you will have to claim at some point are quite a lot further away from the base than these. So if you do decide to expand this way with your constructors, it's also easier to reinforce them with units from your factory and make sure everything is safe. In this case, there's a bit of difference in openings. I like to generally build a constructor really early to start building my energy. And I like to keep one constructor building energy so I don't have to worry about it too much. This is a pattern you'll see me do a lot. Some of the other players do this from time to time as well. I'd consider this opening somewhat of a balanced approach to the game. It's not really aggressive, but it's also not very greedy either. It's more of a balanced approach, which kind of suits my playstyle. My opponent Putis is doing the different thing, utilizing the build power of the commander to quickly construct everything he needs. He's also making a good choice of building the winds on this map. As you can see, the minimum wind on this cliff is 0.6, 0.7. Further up, it's even more. This means wind generators are more efficient than solars. The reason I didn't go for wind generators right away is because, and this could be considered a first mistake already in this game, it's kind of vulnerable up here. If you build a lot of wind here early and you mess up early in the game and some raiders go through, you can end up losing a lot of your energy right away. It's also a bit awkward to build them over here with the constructor because even the constructor is vulnerable. The way Putis is doing it is a bit safer. He has his commander doing it, so even if a raider shows up, as long as he has some supporting units, they shouldn't be able to outmaneuver the commander. The wins are quite safe. It's just something that even later on in the game you have to make sure, if you go for a lot of wins on the hill, that you ensure their safety by building some defenses or utilizing other things such as crawling bombs. This expand pattern is also different. It's doing utilizing the cloaky constructor. This is something you see quite often. The constructor is invisible. It's also not visible on radar. So if you move this out of the way somewhere, there's a chance that your opponent will not spot it. If you have radar coverage, what you can also do is, even if you go for something cheeky like trying to expand somewhere far away, if you have radar coverage and you see enemies coming, you can just run the constructor away and hide. It's really hard to find and track them down if they're invisible. Like, for example, if the constructor comes up here and he sees there's enemies coming, you can just hide it right on the edge of the map, and chances are it won't be found. The opponent will know, obviously, that something is going down, but it's a pretty good move to utilize the constructors in this way. Yeah, so overall with the shield bots, I usually have a somewhat passive approach. This is kind of something I want to change depending on the matchup. I feel like playing kind of passively with shield bots against the cloakies is a mistake because you have the advantage in terms of raiders. The bandits just have a really favorable matchup against glaives. They have good health for their cost, but it's mostly the range and the way attack move works. If you simply attack move your bandits around, it will automatically like kite the glaives and make it really hard for them to fight back. So even if you're not looking, say you have a bunch of glaives going around, or a bunch of bandits going around the map, they run into enemy raiders, they'll just immediately start kiting them if you have them on attack move. You can see here the range advantage. The glaive, even when chasing, the glaive was not able, or even when being chased, the glaive was not able to shoot back. normally units that are retreating have quite the advantage. The only thing the Glaives have going for them in this matchup is that they're slightly cheaper and faster. They generally don't want to fight head on against a bunch of bandits. They want to fight when they outnumber them or retreat and fight elsewhere. Um, I made a quite early second constructor to try and reclaim over here. And this also ties into a expand pattern that I like to do as much as possible in general, which is to have the commander go along a path and then have a constructor go along the path behind it, claiming some of the stuff, with the idea being that the commander will be shielding the constructor from danger, as well as giving radar vision. If you don't do this and you want to claim everything with your commander, it's just kind of slow and inefficient. This is something you'll see me do a lot. So I guess here's the first thing that I noticed about this game is that my opponent has made 0 Lotus turrets. I've already constructed 3 Lotus turrets, and this is something you'll see me do a lot. This is something I've noticed a lot about myself as well. I often play when I'm quite tired, and I fall back on like a sort of autopilot mode where I'm not thinking critically too much, and I just go through the motions. And apparently, I feel safe when I have lots of Lotus turrets, so I end up doing this. While this sometimes works if your opponent is trying to be really aggressive, it can really backfire when your opponent is simply expanding greedily and not really making many turrets himself. This also kind of clashes with the factory matchup. If bandits are superior to glaives, which is my belief, then I should be making more bandits instead of Lotus turrets, because the bandits will do fine against the glaives anyway. It might be better to do this in the reverse situation, where if I was playing with the cloak bots, I could make more Lotus turrets because I cannot rely on my glaives to win the fights consistently. This will probably cause issues later in the game. I remember making quite a lot of Lotus turrets. Currently, the game is quite even. My opponent went for a greedy expand pattern, but not so much that he's outscaling me really hard right away. You can see the first of my commander upgrades. I almost always get the riot cannon first, and then I either get the machine gun or the rocket launcher later on. Another thing you'll see me do a lot is, after building the initial bit of energy, I make a very quick caretaker. My opponent's doing similarly. I feel like it's really important to have this first caretaker out. What you'll see a lot of players do is they'll make a lot of constructors early on in the game, and they'll spend their money that way. So they'll either be expanding a lot, building solars, building defenses everywhere, so much that they won't even notice that they don't have a caretaker yet because they're still spending their money. But you end up with a really poor army value that way. Generally, you just want a lot of units quickly to move around on the map and pressure. If you play with a lot of constructors and invest a lot in defenses, you're kind of banking on the fact that you're going to come out completely unscathed and that your opponent isn't overtaking you by being greedy. This kind of helps my balanced playstyle as well, where I'm not overly greedily expanding, but also not too defensively, generally. With this many turrets, it's a bit dubious to say that. Pretty passive game start so far, neither player really doing that much. We're both happy to expand. Army value is pretty similar. A little bit of excess there from reclaiming. So with the reclaim, I've outpaced my metal income compared to my energy income, so cannot spend my metal. It shouldn't be that much excess. It should be less than 100. Here I'm just doing the usual trying to utilize my bandits against the glaives early on. You can see the attack move. It's very important to attack move, because if you don't, and you're looking away for just a moment, they'll just like run in. It's the glaives range. Here you can see, even though the bandits are somewhat outnumbered, they're performing fine. Although they're not really accomplishing all that much either. Would have been nicer if I'd found this constructor. You could see the sneakiness of this type of pattern. So I did not see a mech sailor. I did not see anything around in the area. He's just snuck around the side. And even if I had radar coverage here, I wouldn't see this stuff either, because the constructors have innate radar jamming. So it's good use of the conjurers by my opponent. And here we start to see a bit of a problem. I've thrown some units away, but this disparity, if you look at the value kills graph, the attrition is mostly equal, so I did not trade poorly. Problem here is that I'm making so many Lotus turrets that my armor value is starting to drop, which really, I think, is a pretty important thing that I need to take care of in the future, is that when you're playing this matchup and you have the shield bots, you should just really be using the bandits to their maximum potential. And if you fall behind an army value like this, it doesn't matter how many or how well you use your bandits against the glaives. If there's too many of them, they cannot win. This was kind of funny as well. My opponent sneaking in a constructor into my base. I'm pretty sure I overreacted to this. I was thinking somehow there's a bigger threat than there really was. This was also quite nice. I was sending in, like, this was pretty random. I noticed that I did not have many units out on the map. I was kind of wondering, like, where's my stuff? I normally have a lot more units. I didn't quite realize that I'm making so many Lotuses. So I'm like, okay, well, I gotta start doing the usual, starting to pressure. I was sending only a very small amount of bandits across the map. And also ran right across my opponent's radar view here. So he was able to set up the imp and counter no problem. See that my opponent's also slightly ahead due to the expand pattern. He's made far less defenses. This is a problem where if you set up too defensively, an opponent being more greedy than you will just get a little economic advantage. Here we also see another problem. The reason why I have 3 Lotus turrets in my base is not only because I overreacted to this, but also because my opponent is playing with the cloak bots, and my opponent is also known for doing reaver attacks with cloaked reavers. So because I have such little map control, I have very few units out on the map. I've not really been able to pressure my opponent at all, and so I'm worried. I cannot know for sure if he's up to something. And as you can see, he's definitely up to something. This is, I think, a pretty critical moment. This attack is going to do a lot of damage. And the way to combat this, and what I need to fix in my play is, once again, these Lotus turrets. Need to forget about those, build way more bandits. And if I'm able to pressure more effectively and don't allow this sort of greedy pattern, like this is a lot of economy defended by 1 Lotus. There's not much nearby. If I was properly pressuring my opponent, he wouldn't be so free to build this many Reavers and just go and attack me. The other thing is, if I am pressuring properly, I will also get more information about what my opponent is doing. Currently, for me, the map is mostly black. I've sent out like 1 raiding group recently that got destroyed. I don't have particularly good radar coverage, so I'm pretty much in the dark here, and also distracted by this going on in the back. So my opponents, they've taken the initiative here, which is a huge problem. Definitely important to play the matchup appropriately. There's really no reason not to. If you find yourself building lots of Lotus turrets, think again. You need a pretty good reason to do that. In here, I had a pretty good suspicion that something like this was coming, but I had no idea where and when. But I was feeling kind of safe up here with my commander. He's level 4. He has the right cannon and the machine gun. Um, so I was just trying to move around and see what's up. Here you can see, I distinctly remember this. I moved away with my commander from the buildings right when the enemy reavers showed up. Um, the commander, this is why I normally like the Guardian commander. If he was a bit behind still, if I had, obviously I couldn't have known this was coming exactly. Uh, but just to demonstrate, well, I guess I can't really demonstrate it either, but I guess you have to take my word for it that if my commander was near the back and not walking into the reavers, there's a good chance he would survive this encounter. But as it stands, he got completely ganked. Like, this is amazing for my opponent. You see quite a bit of value dropping. It was a level 4 commander. That's like 600 metal worth of upgrades. Uh, it's not that much, but it hurts. You also lose the income that you get from simply owning a commander, as you can see here. My opponent's commander is still generating 4 metal and 6 energy for him. So it always sucks to lose that guy. A lot of people treat their commanders like some disposable constructor. They'll just wander him around the map. And then when he dies, they don't really give it much second thought. Personally, for me, I really hate losing my commander. Usually, I want to be more aggressive with him as well. I was kind of hanging back because I had a very strong suspicion that there would be something like this happening. So I kind of wanted to see what was going to happen and then start pressuring. Ideally, if I was pressuring my opponent more, my commander would have already started sieging this top area. This is what I like to do on Vantage. Send my commander in along the top and keep him supported with units. He really only needs a few bandits nearby, and then the escalation for the shield boss is to start making rogues that outrange a lot of the defenses, so you can put on a lot of pressure. But because, once again, I've made, I don't know, infinite lotuses over here, and in my base because I was scared of these Cloak Reapers hitting my base, I just fell so far behind on army value, as you can see. This just completely takes away all the initiative. Another thing that I saw my opponent do, which is quite cool, is he's got this wind farm up really early. It's quite exposed, as you can see. There is some lacking radar here, but because he has the upper hand and because I have not been pressuring at all, this is like unchecked greed doing its thing. You can see he has enormous overdrive simply from this. This is very efficient. I would definitely recommend anyone to playing on this map to invest in this wind farm as soon as you can. You can see me sort of doing the same on the other side, but it's not nearly as set up as this is. From here on out, it's gonna be tough for me. I know I'm behind. My opponent still has some reavers, and he's on the wreck field, which means it's really hard to push them out and contest that. This is just like a desperate attack with the few units that I have to try and get any sort of way back into this game. So even though I had a favorable matchup, the shield boss, because I didn't really play to their strengths, I'm just falling behind. This is where my opponent realizes that he's in the driving seat right now. Um, he's moving his commander out. It's idle right now, but he's got a lot of units nearby to support, so it's not like it's in much danger. He's just gonna start laying on the pressure. You can see the effects of being scared of Reavers. It's not this is like another autopilot thing, really. It's just so easy for me to select a constructor and just go ham with Lotus turrets. Um, yeah, it's a problem. This is another fairly defining point in the game, I'd say, from what I remember. It's, he gets this sort of foothold right outside my base, which is really hard to deal with because I'm behind. This gives him a lot of map control in the end. Currently, it still looks somewhat okay. Like I've managed to hold on to this. I've got a little something going here, and I've done some raiding, um, so that's good. But the problem here is that, and this is why pushing is quite nice, even though there's no resources in the middle or anything. He started a fight here, so there's already wrecks, so this makes fighting here somewhat valuable. But it keeps me really tied down. He gets supreme radar coverage of my entire side of the map, and it allows him to start pressuring the sides while also denying me the opportunity to apply much pressure. This is something you'll see me do a lot, sending in this sort of small amount of units. It's like a opportunistic thing. You just go along the sides every now and then and just keep your opponent honest, so to speak. And sometimes you get lucky where there's not much defenses there, and you get some value. Other times, uh, even though the opponent is ready for it, they see it coming on the radar, they have units there to defend, you can pull back with a small group like this and just sort of keep it active on the flanks. I feel like it's very important to try and avoid getting bogged down like this. Like, it's really clear to me that my opponent wants to control this area and start grinding. You see this a lot in 0K where there's like some point on the map where two armies just start clashing. They just keep headbutting in the same spot over and over. Um, while that's how a lot of games play out, I feel like the player that manages to divert some attention and resources elsewhere on the map generally tends to win out, unless it's some silly map where the center is the only thing that matters. You always want to make sure that you have raids going along the sides. You see my opponent doing the same thing. He's also taken the opportunity to switch to the shield bot factory himself. This is because my opponent knows the power of the rogue. This is currently a very strong unit, and it's tough to deal with. The cloak bot factory doesn't really have anything that has a good time against rogues. You'd think raiders counter this sort of unit, but rogues tend to retreat really early due to their large range. And because the bandits are so strong against the glaives, it's really hard to get onto them and fight head on, even with large amounts of glaives. Ronin just has weaker stats, even though it's cheaper. And the range difference mainly just makes it so that the Ronin has a really hard time fighting, because when these units clash, the Ronin will be moving into the rogue, which gives it a little bit extra range to boot, I believe, due to pre-firing mechanics. But basically, because the Ronin is too busy trying to get into range to shoot its own shot, it'll just get hit by the rogue. Makes it really hard to deal with. Reavers are still really nice to have, though. They don't really deal with the rogues, but what they do is they deny the shield bot factory from moving in to where the Reavers are. It's a bit hard to explain, but there's not much in the shield bot factory unless you make a Phalan with thugs that can push away Reavers quickly. Rogues will get a job done, but the Reavers can dodge around. They have quite a bit of health. I think they can take 2 shots from a rogue and still live, yeah. And they have high regeneration. Bandits also really bad against Reavers. The Reavers like the counter to Raiders, really. So this is really hard to dislodge. Rogues will do it eventually. But because my opponent is combining these 2 factories, this is something that should definitely be encouraged. A lot of people get hung up on playing on one factory only. Especially when you get the upper hand like this in value, it's nice to diversify and build strong unit combinations. Basically, these Reavers can fill the same role that a Phalan plus a bunch of thugs would accomplish, but for much less cost at this point in the game. You can see attrition favoring my opponent somewhat because he ganked my commander and is still doing quite well, pressuring. gigantic army advantage means he's in the driving seat of this game. Basically, at this point, all I can hope is to try and hold on. I was kind of okay with taking this battle close to my base. I didn't really have a choice. I couldn't really decline. I don't think there would be too much pressure. But once this sort of thing starts, there's a lot of metal. You can see already there's, even though both sides are already reclaiming, there's over 1,000 metal here. You cannot just let that go into your opponent's hands. You can see I'm currently leaning on reclaim. I'm pretty sure that changes later on in the game. Another reason why I didn't mind taking a fight here is it's a lot closer to my base than it is to his base. So I got a lot more reinforcing units coming in. My plan here was to try and trade effectively and reestablish this corner of my base. But because I'm already so far behind, it's actually really difficult to get this back. He's also denying these two max spots, which is quite important. You can see here that while he's currently taking a dip in metal income because of my raids, that won't last because, as you can see here, rogues doing what rogues do best. They clear out lotuses with no problem. The lotus cannot do anything. And he's just, because he's making so much pressure right in front of my base, it's really hard to divert units to try and stop this. I mean, you could send bandits around, but at this point I'm constantly juggling my unit production to what I need. Oh yeah, that's another thing I wanted to point out. I used to repeat on the factory. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. I believe personally that you should always use repeat. I think the reason that a lot of people don't like repeat is because sometimes if you start thinking about stuff, you start thinking in like really weird ratios. Like you want a whole bunch of some unit and a whole bunch of another unit. And then once you want the constructor in that same block, you're like, oh wait, but now I need a different ratio because you don't want to end up with too many constructors and you end up making really elaborate repeat queues. I think the way to do it, personally, I think the way to do it is to keep things simple. What you'll see me do a lot is simply queue one raider. So I've changed it now, but in a lot of my games and a lot of stages, even in this game, I will have one bandit on repeat, and then anytime I need anything else, I would just insert that into the repeat queue. You can hold Alt and then click more units into it, and they'll be built once, so they won't actually go into the repeat queue. They'll just be built once and then ejected from the queue. This way you can still produce things that you need on demand. But the main advantage of that is that if you get distracted or there's something intense going on, you're not looking at your factory, at least you'll be producing whatever you put on repeat, which is usually a raider. And I would rather have 10 bandits, even though I might have wanted different units, than have nothing at all and just have an idle factory. Similarly, if you do play without repeat, and probably even if you do play with repeat, I would recommend hotkeying your factory so that you don't have to go back and look at it. You can just be in a battle and just tap your factory hotkey and bring in some more unit types that you need in the battle. It's important to be efficient with things like that. In terms of economy, at the moment, it's somewhat similar. Gotten some economy going. I didn't quite make as many wins as my opponent did. And looking back at this replay, I definitely wish I had. I feel like economic escalation is very important. I tend to focus a bit much on some of the unit matchups. I'll think, oh, I need to make a factory switch, similarly to what my opponent did, to get the upper hand. But another way to get the upper hand, especially if you're already ahead, the way to get more ahead is to build more economy. And it's very safe, and it's quite flexible as well, because if you end up with a stronger economy, even if you're still in one lap, the fact that you're producing more units just lets you do all kinds of things. Exert pressure on parts of the map where your opponent cannot match you because you have more production. Things like that. The other thing is that on this map, because the wind is so strong on this little hill, uh, the returns are just humongous. The investment is so low, it's 600. This is less than what you would pay for a factory. Plus 20 energy, depending on how much energy you build, can make a real difference in terms of overdrive. Um, Overdrive, I guess, is a bit of a complicated subject as well, but I feel like to boil it down, um, there's a certain threshold where you start gaining overdrive first, and that threshold is very important. Um, it's very efficient to build just enough energy that you start getting your first returns on this max. So, for example, this one is at 60, it's a bit high. You don't actually need that much. Um, my economy is actually not in that great shape because I'm missing overdrive on these maxes. What you want ideally is to have some solars or some energy production, like kind of what my opponent is doing here and here. Um, these solars are not connected to the main network of energy, but they're still enough to supply the max with a base amount of overdrive. So if you build enough energy and you have most of your maxes connected to at least one solar, you get really good returns. You don't need like very high amounts of energy with like think advanced GS or fusions to really get use out of this. And because overdrive, um, if you get this up early, like you can see my opponent had his, remember he made his wind farm very early in the game. These differences add up. This is over 2,000 metal that my opponent has that I don't because he made a bunch of wins. This is easily paid for itself. It's very important, and it's very easy to neglect. If you have your energy just sort of matching your metal, you're not stalling, you're not in any problems, but you're kind of missing out on that extra economic oomph, so to speak. Always recommend building energy. What I tend to do is have one constructor just building energy all throughout the game. But as you can see here, my game plan has been disrupted. There's no constructor building energy. This is what happens when I'm under pressure, or when anyone is under pressure. Things go wrong. I think, oh no, I need a constructor to go fight or I lose the game type thing. But really, one constructor could have just been here, just slamming down more solars, or preferably wins up here, all throughout the game. And it's quite a kind of an easy thing as well because you could make this really complicated and say, oh, I need X amounts of stuff by X time, or I want to keep ramping up my economy. But really, at least in 1v1, I think one constructor building the energy all throughout the game is sufficient. Except maybe during the start, you might want a little more energy to get to the threshold of gaining overdrive. What I'll have to do is, oh, I just noticed this nano is this nano is poorly placed. It's just out of range of the factory, so it's not doing anything. I wouldn't recommend doing this. Build your nanos in range of your factory. But if you slam down some energy near your nanos, they will occasionally switch from building on the assisting the factory to building the nanos to building the energy. This way, you can quickly build a little bit of energy, like the early mid game, say like minutes 5 or 6. Meanwhile, this battle has been raging on. It's not, I haven't commented on it super much because it's kind of a grind. This is what happens with rogues versus rogues, and usually skirmishers, they just sort of smash in the middle and trade shots. There's some subtle things you can do here to try and get the upper hand, but I've been a little distracted, I guess. Um, this is another area I feel like I could improve a lot. I tend to go into like survival mode. This game I was on a sort of autopilot. Then this Reaver gang rocked my world, and I got pressured. So a lot of my focus ends up going here. But what also happens is, and this is part of my, so to speak, survival mode, I just start pushing really hard. I'll often have my raiders or my skirmishers just sort of attack in a line like this, and I'll just be constantly issuing orders like push, push, push. But what you kind of want to do with these skirmisher battles is bait your opponent in and then shoot as they're coming in. because I don't know if it's easy to demonstrate with this small amount of rogues, but if they're sort of matching like this side to side, then they're going to be dodging and trading and whatnot. It's kind of equal, right? And nobody's at an advantage or disadvantage. But say this one starts backing away and my rogues start coming in. It'll be in a similar situation as what I described with the Ronins. Or even though the units have the same range, the ones retreating have the advantage because the ones coming in are walking in a straight line and can be hit. So you occasionally want to get out of the, or I need to occasionally get out of the push mode where I'm just pushing and occasionally back away and see if my opponent will come forward and I can take shots at units that are retreating. It's a bit hard to do here as well because of the stinger. Stingers are becoming a little more important, I would say. It depends on the matchup, but anytime you're playing against a factory that has a lot of skirmishers like Ronins and Rogues, Stinger's nice because it outranges them all, so you cannot... Like, you can build as many Lotuses here as you want, it doesn't mean anything against the Rogues. The Stingers are nice, you'll often see these being constructed to help with skirmisher wars. Here you can see me doing somewhat of my normal game plan where I want to not always just grind down the center, but exert some pressure around the map. I'm also worried about losing control of the sides. And here you can also see my opponent taking advantage of the fact that he's created a lot of pressure here to go after my vulnerable sides. You can see me running my units around, but there's no time to get there. This is another pretty good move that is somewhat underrated, I'd say. You can see the advantage. Once again, a small group of little bandits going around the sides. If there was a ton of defenses here, I would have to pull back, but this sort of allows me to stay in the game. Yeah, just finally committing, destroying my expansion. So now I'm in a pretty bad shape. I've lost control of the top, I've lost control over the bottom. I'm just like barely holding on. This attack is suicidal. This is part of my go mode, my push mode. I'm just fighting to the death when really I should be like taking a deep breath or something, stepping back and doing smart things and not just sending my units in. Something I've noticed about myself, and especially when I look at games, and also when I look at this game, is that I don't value the lives of my raider units enough. I do it okay when I'm raiding around the sides, but then too often I'm just sending them in, clashing and attacking, when there's really not much to be gained. I guess that stems down to me having generally good results with piling on the pressure, never letting go. It's kind of part of my playstyle, but it can be exploited. Good enemies or good opponents will know that I have these tendencies and can be baited. I can be baited this way. It's kind of nice if you're in the driving seat of a game. You have the upper hand. You have the time and the patience. You can just sort of check these things on your opponent. You can pull back. You can be a little patient, and more often than not, they will be in a similar mental state as I am in this game and just throw away units. Here I've committed to building some Thug Felon because I really wanted to push the Stinger and get this area back. I was hoping that this would give me some ground. And it does do the job. It kills the Stinger, it kills the commander. This is kind of nice. I really liked my opponent did this because it's something that I think is a little underrated. Just building a cloaker like this. It's not even factory specific. Like he made it from his Cloakbot factory, but any constructor can simply build the Cornea, and you can morph this into the moving variant. So he could have also built the Cornea with his commander out here. A nice thing you can do with the Cornea as opposed to the Iris is that you can bury it in the ground. It's really hard to notice that there's actually a cloaker there, and even if you do know it's there, a lot of units do not have the capacity to hit it when it's underground. Having a cloaker in a skirmish battle like this is such a huge advantage. You can see him here using imps under the cover of the cloak. Is really hard to deal with. If your units are invisible and your opponents are not, and the opponent is A-moving like I am here, they'll just walk forward thinking, oh, it's clear, I'm gonna move to my location, my destination. And then they'll just run head first into dangerous units such as Reavers, like this. I would definitely recommend doing this, copying this from old Brutus here, because it's very strong. And it's another great reason to invest in things like this wind farm, because this thing costs 16.5 energy per second to maintain. Here's my opponent doing more correct things, maintaining pressure on one side and then using a bunch of raiders to sweep around the sides. A lot of players just get way too bogged down in one area, but the way to win this is, or the way to win in higher level games is to keep your attention split everywhere, pressuring everything, even little things like this. This is something I like doing a lot as well. My opponent's doing an excellent job of showcasing this. Is these Reavers, they don't have too many jobs they could be doing here. There's not much they can assault. They could come down here, but they'll get pushed away by rogues. If they move around the sides, they would probably get countered. They don't. Reavers aren't terrific against Lotus. But what they're really great at is just sort of camping around areas the opponent would really like to expand to or move through. The amount of resources it takes to get rid of 2 or 3 Reavers is much greater than the actual cost of the Reavers itself. So you can use this to just sort of claim areas, ward off any enemies or advances, gain map control that way. Definitely recommend doing this. Another great thing is it doesn't really work on this map or in this situation, but sometimes you can wander Reavers like sort of near your opponent's lab rally point and just snipe units off. This works particularly well with at least 2 Reavers. I think if you do this with 1 Reaver, they're still kind of susceptible to trading poorly against a large group of raiders. So for example, if 7 bandits show up, they can definitely deal with 1 Reaver. As soon as there's 2 Reavers and they're sort of side to side, it becomes really hard to trade cost efficiently with raiders. You need a lot of them, like a perfect surround. It doesn't really happen. Game is still somewhat even. Both of our sides are like wiped out. There's a lot of reclaim in the middle. It's actually looking reasonable for me. There's 2,500 reclaim here. Let's take a look here. My opponent looks like he's gotten the upper hand in reclaim. So while he was here earlier with the commander, he mopped up most of the resulting wrecks. And his overdrive is still doing work. I'm catching up a little bit in terms of overdrive. Our energies are kind of similar. Let's take a look at the army value. Yeah, this is the big difference here. My opponent is controlling the map much more than I am. He has bandits over here, he has Reavers over here. His army here is still keeping me in check. I've reclaimed some of the maxes, but so even though I've successfully raided him multiple times, he's going to be able to re-expand and retake these areas much more efficiently and cheaply than I am. I have to first deal with all kinds of units and problems before I can take the maxes. You can also see that I'm still somewhat in a tunnel vision here. While I've been raiding the sides, what I'm really noticing is I have a real lack of constructors on the flanks. There's no, as you can see here, there's not a single constructor here. There's not a single constructor here. Everything is down here in the middle. So while I'm dealing damage to my opponent, I'm not really able to get back in the game at this rate because I'm simply not rebuilding and I'm not pressuring. I'm not locking down these areas. What I want to be doing is having constructors going around here, reclaiming these areas, reclaiming the wrecks, and then setting up defenses and radar again so I can hold the area. I don't do this or do this too late, my opponent will simply make another batch of raiders and keep me in disarray. Here you can see more pressure due to this iris. It's very impressive. It's really hard to deal with this. And you see me do this later in the game. I'll go for the jump bot factory because I feel like I just cannot deal with um, the cloaker. Otherwise, I need like flames everywhere to show where the units are. Opponent has been fairly good with imps this game as well. That's something I pretty sure I underutilize. I have snitches on this map. I have one here. I have one here. I feel like I could have definitely used a couple more snitches. There's a couple of obvious locations like this one and over here. As you can see earlier, they're mopped up now, but there was a huge bandit attack here. Would have been great if there was a snitch there to take advantage. My opponent's been better with holding imps in strategic locations. You want to put them somewhere in a little choke point where the enemy is kind of forced to come close. And then right when the units come in, you run the imp in to hit as many units as possible. Imps and snitches also work really well with the cloaker. They can go in while cloaked like this and just sort of jump out of nowhere and stun or detonate on enemy units. Doesn't work when there's no support, but you get the idea. My opponent's just being really good with reclaiming. You can see he's not letting go of this area. He's constantly sending new stuff in. Same thing here. This is what I need to be doing as well. You see here he has units and he has constructors backing them up, rebuilding everything. Over here he has constructors. He doesn't have units, but he's units in the area. Over here he's just rebuilding in peace. Whereas if I wanted to build over here, I have almost nothing left down there. Excuse me. So proper like combined forces between your constructors and your units are very important. Don't get too bogged down on a central grinding battle. You can see the Firewalker switch. This is very common because the Firewalker is an insanely powerful unit in 1v1. It has fantastic range, 900, and it shoots flames in a very large AoE. So as long as this Firewalker doesn't die to something, it's just always going to pile on the pressure. It can be dangerous building and committing to this Firewalker because you have to pay 700 for the lab and then 900 for the Firewalker itself. So a lot of the time you really need to be careful when you switch. I felt like I had no other choice because of this. I really wanted to pile on more pressure and maybe move out on the map, but I cannot break this position as long as there's a cloaker here and a bunch of reavers. Like the rogues cannot deal with this. Here you can see some semblance of what I'm supposed to be doing. Having some units defending, having a constructor behind it. I'm pretty sure here I advance overly again, stuck in the mindset of pushing, and really I should be consolidating a little more. Because the game is still fairly even. Though you can see my opponent gaining the upper hand in terms of income and metal used. Here's a crazy imp attack. Having problems busting your opponent, you just stun everything. Seems still producing healthy amounts of constructors. Very important. It's, in a game like this, it's almost tempting. I almost never do this, but it's almost tempting to make a repeat queue that includes a constructor It's very normal on larger maps because you just simply want lots of constructors. Um, for me, there's always a danger that you end up with too many constructors if you do that, but I don't know. I feel like if you're struggling like this, if you notice this sort of pattern in your play where, oh wow, I wish I had some constructors around here, maybe it's time to consider finding some nice unit ratios with constructor in the queue so you always have them. So I don't think I can show it on the currently, but another thing I use very often is I have the idle constructor button hotkeyed, and there's a UI element here that I can't show right now, but it'll show when a constructor's idle. So if I see like the little warning light or the warning texture of the idle con, I just immediately smash the button and put them to work. Um, you'll see me. Uh, you've watched some of my FP videos, maybe, and you'll see me spamming the button a lot. Basically, every 10-15 seconds, I'll be switching to some idle constructor. Um, if you ingrain this somehow um, into the way you play, it's quite easy to manage even large amounts of constructors because you don't need to have a huge plan for each and every one of them. You just swap right over. See, for example, if I was looking here and the constructor down south was idle, I would just switch to it, take a quick look, and say, oh well, I probably need to take these maxes or reclaim some stuff. Like, it doesn't take very long to judge what to do with each constructor. I'll speed up the game a little bit here. You can definitely see the difference in map control. My opponent is gaining control of this corner. He's held this corner, so the graph should reflect this. Definite income advantage. You see it's spiking upwards now. Doing a good job of switching pressure here as well. What's happening here is that the firewalkers came out and started pressuring his units, and he realized that you can't really afford to like dance around in the fire. Um, and he's doing the smart thing of why would you throw away your units in a unfavorable engagement when you can relocate and make pressure elsewhere? So that's exactly what you see him do here. I don't think I was watching this snitch. It's kind of interesting to see how much it actually gets. Oh, it got decloaked by looks of it. Yeah, nothing major. If I was watching here, you could see the units coming in. What you're supposed to do is you select the snitch if you're paying attention and just run it right into the units. Usually they're not able to react in time before the snitch is close enough to do critical damage. Once again, still pressuring around the sides. That's the one thing I'm at least pleased about this game. I kept sending units around the sides, kept trying to put my opponent in check, or keeping my opponent in check. So as you can see here, he just refuses to invest into too many defenses. Like while I was hammering on in the early game, like I made way too many lotuses. At this stage in the game, if you can just lock this area down with like a few, like kind of what's happening here, a bunch of lotuses and then maybe a stinger later on, you can't really send in small groups of units anymore to attack them. If you're the one that's in control of the game and you have the superior economy, it's really nice to not have to worry about this kind of stuff anymore. You just lock the map down slowly but surely. Again, you can still see the distinction here. He has convicts and units over here. There's convicts over here. The constructors have like a single convict here with barely enough unit support. It's nice that I have firewalkers pushing the center, but it's not going to win me the game at this rate because the sides of the map are so important. More good use out of the iris. You can see a small attempt of what I could be doing in this game more. Definitely something I'm working on is just sending small amounts of rogues onto the sides to be annoying. yes, they're vulnerable and enemy raiders can just come and mop them up, but it takes some attention away, and all you have to do is tell them to attack. Uh, there's a stinger here, so it won't work. But usually earlier in the game, and if you're in a better position, there won't be a stinger, there will be lotuses. You can just make free pressure like this. And if you do this, say, on the south, on the north, and in the center, uh, it gets very annoying for your opponent to deal with very quickly. So this is something to keep in mind when you're playing with the shield bots. Trying to have rogues around the sides doing stuff like this. It's not a particularly huge investment. Even with these bandits coming in, there's a good chance some of the rogues will get some shots off on them and make a little bit of cost. Speaking of cost, because of the firewalkers, the attrition is looking reasonable, even though there's been quite a bit of army deficit. But because I wasn't able to convert this into territory and resources, I'm still not really into the game. Like this, the closeness of this graph is kind of misleading because he's simply producing more units and I'm killing them in a slightly better ratio, which is keeping this sort of clear. But as soon as that changes, as soon as he stops trading poorly, he's just going to shoot out ahead. Nice amounts of defenses. Meanwhile, my little effort was thwarted. I had a constructor here as well, but got destroyed. Very similar things going on. Both players raiding around the flanks. It's very important. Let's take a look at the overdrive. Yeah, you can see my opponent's made a bit more energy. Even though he's been raided a lot, there's not too many supporting energy buildings on some of these maxes anymore. But he's still pulled out ahead on overdrive. Similarly on reclaim, there's a lot of battle going down the middle. But he's never lost sight of the reclaim. You combine all these things, you combine the overdrive, you combine the extra maxes, the reclaim, and you end up with a fairly chunky lead. Some nice cloak reavers around the side. You can actually see me. I distinctly remember this was a problem, and I wanted to make some dirt bags and spread them around to try and stop these sort of cloaked shenanigans. But I was too late. I went for the Juggernaut here to try and deal with these amounts of knights. I kind of wanted a unit that could take point against his cloaked. I think the Iris has died at this point, probably to the Firewalker. But I never had units that could actually go in. If I sent in the bandits or the rogues, they would just get slaughtered by the cloaked units of my opponent. So I invested into this Juggernaut to try and actually gain some ground. I think at this point, yeah, I'm actually taking a small value lead here as well. I think it's due to the, yeah, you can see here the attrition pulling apart. I got some good shots in with the Firewalker and killed some stuff with the Juggernaut. And I think this is something I ended up regretting. Okay, well, I didn't regret this energy raid. This is what I mean with the risk of building an energy farm on this hill. It's so easy to not have radar coverage here. I would recommend kind of building a radar in here. It's something I see Andy do a lot. And I wish I would remember to do, because if you have one radar here or in the middle of the map, you just don't have vision around the sides. And raiders will come in, and if this is lightly protected, like it was for Putus here, with a single Lotus, you're not looking for one like crucial moment and units get into your wind line and you end up taking a lot of damage. Similar, if I had more wins here, I would be in a similar situation. I wish I had more wins here. I made more solars. I mean, it's nice, but it's not as efficient. I end up regretting this as well. This goes back to what I said earlier. I don't value the lives of my raiders enough when it's in a crunching battle like this. I just threw away so many bandits into the flames. Uh, I was probably feeling like good that I finally pushed my opponent back. I was like, go, 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 I gotta fight, I gotta attack. But imagine if those bandits just went up here and got rid of all of this stuff. Like if I'd seen this bunch of 7 constructors with my raiders and killed them off, I would feel great. Instead, I ran them into my own flames and threw them away. Um, it's very easy in the later portions of the game to just neglect the lives of your raiders, but leave the leave the grinding to the skirmish units like the rogues and the firewalkers. And don't commit with your bandits unless you have a good reason to. Now my attack's been repelled, and I haven't actually made any pressure on the parts of the map that matter. So you can see this gigantic difference in income here. So even though I may have been temporarily, I am still ahead in value. Um, that simply won't last unless I can do some damage to him. And I'm not able to push through here. Excuse me. Here we see lances coming out. You don't actually see this all too often in 1v1, but in this game it was a pretty good choice. Pretty ballsy choice too, because he has some problems on the sides here. On the other hand, some of his other flanks are still relatively secured, so even if this goes down, he's still probably equal with me. This lance solves a lot of the problems that he's having with my army. The Juggernaut basically cannot operate as a frontliner against the lances, so they'll just get shot to death. Firewalkers also have to be careful because the Firewalker has 900 range and the lance has 1000 range. So if the lance has got a vision on any of my stuff here, it's just going to die. Desperately trying to keep the health of my Juggernaut up so he doesn't get finished off by his lances. This is another cool trick. You usually see this in team games where people build a radar kind of near the front line because this radar actually has 1100 sight range. So he has perfect vision of what's going on here, which is exactly what he needs for these lances to be effective. He's got them on fire radar, which usually means that they'll fire the laser kind of wildly and maybe scratch a unit, but it won't be as effective. So it's very important with lances that you get vision somehow. You can use aircraft, you can use fleas. I don't know if you have those available. It's kind of a nice thing about these firewalkers. They'll fire happily at radar blobs and be effective because you can see the spread here of the flames. They're gonna hit. They're gonna hit regardless. But lances really want vision. So always make sure your lances know what they're firing at. It's debatable whether or not fire at radar state is useful. I think in team games I quite like having it turned off. Because it's not worth taking a shot if you don't have radar vision, or if you don't have actual vision, you only have radar vision. I think in 1v1 it's kind of okay. Here you can see my opponent bouncing back. His losses are not due to economy problems, it's due to unit matchups, and now that he's on more equal ground, he's just shooting back up. And I just haven't fixed any of my problems. I don't have that much energy. I've made some energy in my overdrive. Compared to his, it's still lacking. I don't have control of the size. I don't even have anything like trying to go up here. I have some units, but no constructors. Over here, similarly, I have some units, one constructor. My attention was too much in the center. Trying to push, staying in survival mode for too long. When I was actually ahead here, I could have probably, if I had taken out at least the north side and claimed it for myself, it would be an equal game. You can see me desperately trying to deal with the lances. I like switching to ravens or a Lico usually to bomb them away. If you send in 2 ravens, they cost 600. The lance is 1,000, so it's a very good trade. You need 2 ravens to destroy a lance. It usually works up to a point. Anti-air in this game can be very powerful. You can see the dug-in cornea strategy. I wanted to try and have some units nearby that the lances couldn't just destroy. That's kind of too little, too late. I just cannot muster the amount of units that I need. And the lances are doing work. You can see the attrition closing in. I don't have the means to deal with this. Taking out the north, but it's too little, too late. You can see 2 ravens will destroy a single lance. It's quite effective, but it's harder. I couldn't really capitalize on it in this game because I was already too far behind and did not have the units. If the game is a little more equal, you can take out the lances and then immediately take advantage. It's usually a solid move. The other option, I guess, would be to go lances of your own or go heavily into raiders or some such. There are some options to dealing with this. Usually it's to not fight where the lances are directly, like do more of this thing where you're going around the sides, making pressure elsewhere. So lances are very slow. On this kind of small map, and he's also put them in the center. It's a very nice place for lances to be. And here's what ends up ending the game. This is very common in 1v1 to make the missile silo. You'll see in a moment why, if you're not already familiar with it. Missile silo has a very large range, so it can be made in relative safety. And you can just immediately start piling on the pressure into your opponent's base with it. A thing I usually do, sometimes do, I'm still working on it, is to preemptively drop a few of these Aegises around the base. I believe they don't drain energy if they're at full capacity. It's mostly to guard against the silo. What's going to happen is he's going to start firing these napalm missiles into my base. It's going to hit the nanos in the factories, and it's going to paralyze my production. And once the fire is down on the ground, it's really hard to build the Aegises then because they'll burn. You can see here the Inferno. He has so much income, so many constructors. You can just produce these like no tomorrow, while I'm still stuck like trying to deal with the lances. It's a very powerful move. I think even if you're behind, as long as you can build this thing just barely in range of the enemy base like he has here, that's all you need. Not too many people at the moment are building these Aegises beforehand either. Another thing that could help against the silo assault is to have your nanos kind of spread out. Kind of like this guy over here if he was actually in range of the buildings. So for example, if this is your starting factory, you place some nanos in like a semicircle around the back or something. Avoid clustering them so that if your opponent does manage to get a silo on you, he doesn't immediately burn all your nanos. At this point, he can produce so many missiles that it makes a little difference. Here I'm doing my best to try and fight around the sides. I've got a single constructor over here. It's just too little, too late. Here come the missiles. If you do, if you don't already know about this interaction, the reason why you want is our constructor here. The reason why you want the Aegis is that the shield, the Inferno, cannot penetrate the shield. So it'll hit the shield and drop the flames sort of in midair, and it won't actually drop down or burn anything. So if you have those in your base already and they fire napalm like this, not only will it not damage your base, but they don't get proper feedback of what's going on there. So they might not even notice that it's not doing anything. Quite often though, when you are making a silo like this, you also want to scout with something so that you know what you're aiming at. Here's an example. He's coming in with the Sparrow. He wants to see what's going on, if it's working. Because he has such a high amount of production, he's going to spot this Aegis coming up, and he can just immediately build the other type of missile, the Eos, and bomb it away. Because the game is already so much in his favor, he can get away with this. But if if it was a more equal game and I had Aegises in place already, and he opted to go for the silo and missiles, that would be quite a large investment for very little payout, right? You pay 1,200 for the silo and then 600 per missile. So preemptively building Aegises could end up saving your life in closer games. It's not really feasible to control the map so much that your opponent cannot reach your base with a silo on many of these smaller maps. There will always be a spot where they can make the silo, and it's usually very difficult to stop them from doing it at some point. Here you can see the paralyzing effects of the missile silo. At this point, there's not much I can do. I had a bunch of constructors here, they all burned to death. I tried to make an Aegis, but it was too little too late. Bandits coming in. I have no ability to deal with the lances. See my net worth going down, and I throw in the towel. It's a pretty fun game to play. Honestly, after my commander died, I thought I was screwed. Ganked really hard. I always hate losing my commander. Opponent played well. It's funny that he's known for doing the cloaky shenanigans, and I've died to it once again. It just shows that it's a very good strategy to be using Reavers with cloak. It's very hard for your opponent to know when and where they're coming, and it really underlines the need to play this matchup differently with the shield bots. Do not make a shitload of Lotuses. Instead, keep the pressure up. Use your superior bandits to pressure your opponent. If there's bandits all up his grill, he can't just make 7 Reavers and cloak them up and walk them into my base. He would have to defend. I would also have more peace of mind knowing if I would see Reavers, because he's using them to defend, because I'm pressuring. I wouldn't have to build Lotuses inside my base to try and defend against hypothetical Reaver attacks. I think that's a pretty important part of what I learned in this game. On the flip side, if you're playing with the Cloakies, you want to do everything you can to avoid fighting glaives against bandits. You want to get some sort of other stuff going. I like this approach a lot, going for greedy expansion, and then the Reavers really countered what I was doing. Normally, it would be more difficult to get away with because of the pressure of the bandits. So you'd be forced into Reavers, probably, to deal with them. Lab switches are on point. Both players, both me and my opponent, not hesitant to switch into other labs. It's very important to do this. There's really no time in the game where it's too early or too late to switch labs. I think you can. I've seen Andy switch into rogues like super early. I've seen people stay on labs for way too long, and then at some point they finally make the switch and it pays off. 0K has a lot of unit interactions, and if you get just a solid unit combo, it can win you the game. Investment of factory is not that much. Another point was always have constructors in important areas and combine them with your forces. I always had either constructors sort of on their own or only raiders doing stuff. Was not able to get control over important areas of the map. Therefore suffered economic deficit. And I guess building a lot of wins on this map is very recommended, and building economy in general recommended, as you can see here on the overdrive. 7,000 metal going the way of my opponent, simply for building economy. Even after getting raided, he just rebuilt it. It's in good shape. You'll notice that he doesn't even need energy pylons to have good overdrive returns. This is because of the way it works with adjacent energy buildings. In 1v1, you are not able to like pump your maxes up to like 100+% all that much. You just really want that 30%, and all it takes is 1 or 2 solars to be able to pump max up to the appropriate overdrive level that you need. So it's very important to constantly have your maxes connected to solars or winds. You don't necessarily need to make a huge energy pylon setup. I guess that just about wraps it up. It's a fun game to play. I've not made any videos like this before, so this was new for me. I hope you learned something, either about me or about the game, and I hope it helps. I hope it was interesting. Thanks for watching. Until next time.